Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give it a few minutes just to make sure that we get everybody on. Good morning,
Good morning, everybody. Just going to give it 1 minute. Just wanted to let everybody know that this will be recorded, so you know. All right, I'm going to get started. First of all, like I just mentioned, this is going to be recorded. The link will be on the Cooling Corridors webpage, and along with the slides for your reference, just so everybody knows. Thank you for coming today. My name is Hillary Domino. I am the Tree Planting Program Manager working in the Division of Conservation Services, which is within the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And I manage the Cooling Corridors Grant Program. So first, what's the Cooling Corridors Program? This program primarily funds tree planting projects throughout the Commonwealth. So all municipalities and there are other entities that are eligible to apply for this program. It was initiated in 2024. This is the third round of grants. It is a 2-year grant program, with the second year typically focusing on the watering requirement. And again, it is an Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs grant. There are a few changes this year from past grant rounds. First, as I'm assuming many of you may know, but maybe not, Cooling Corridors is now part of the Environment and Climate One Stop, or the Eco One Stop, as we've been calling it. Cooling Corridors, along with 6 other grant programs, notably the MVP program, dams and seawalls, a couple CZM grants, including the Coastal Resilience and Habitat and Water, planning assistance, and the DER culvert replacement grant. So if you are planning to apply to multiple grants this year, the Eco One Stop is a great tool for you to use when you're applying for multiple grants through EEA. The link is on the slide. So if you have any questions about it, you can certainly click that link. Also, later in the slide, I do note there will be 2 different information sessions related to the Eco One Stop specifically. So I encourage you to check those out. Additionally, the grant funding per project is decreased, unfortunately, to 75,000 this year. So grant max requests can be only 75,000 as far as grant funds that you're requesting. There is a 10% match required this year. That can be an in-kind match or a fund request, or I'm sorry, a funding match, either way. I encourage you to utilize that funding or that match funds for potentially your watering requirement, as there is a requirement to water trees 2 full years after they're planted, which will technically, the time span will get you past the grant contract. So it's perfectly acceptable to use those grant funds or your match funds to fund the remaining of the watering requirement in your community. Lastly, I'm joined by a few colleagues that will share a little bit more about this in a bit, but we are piloting the use of a new tool. It's called the Mass Enviro Screen tool in collaboration with the EJ office. The tool will identify burdened areas throughout the Commonwealth. And like I said, I have a couple colleagues on that are going to share a little bit more information about that for you. So cooling quarters grant priorities. First and foremost, targeted tree planting projects. Looking for projects that emphasize putting trees in the ground, specifically in identified hotspots, areas that are suffering from extreme heat, urban heat islands, and near or along walking routes that vulnerable populations or others may be using to get to locations that they need to get to. Also, looking for trees that are sited using the right tree, right place methodology, meaning if you're planting trees in a nice large open area, you're planting shade trees, which is going to maximize the benefits as far as heat mitigation, stormwater capture, particulate air collection, all of that. If you're planting trees in an area that's a little bit more restricted, you should be mindful of the species that you're planting to make sure that we're not causing conflicts with any overhead wires or other potential obstacles. Proper tree care and maintenance is incredibly important and is a big part of this grant. I note in later slides, watering plan is essential for this grant. Trees must be watered for 2 consecutive years after they're planted on a regular basis once a week, and they need to be provided a minimum of 20 gallons per week. Impervious surface removal is also a big priority of this grant. So removing impervious surfaces in order to increase tree planting. So if you're thinking about creating a green strip, if you're thinking about pulling up a chunk of parking lot, or creating large tree pits to, again, increase the amount of trees planted, all of those are acceptable potential projects and are a top priority of this program. Implementation of cooling services is also something that we're looking to achieve. So tree planting in tandem with other techniques or methodologies that decrease urban heat, such as painting surfaces lighter colors, installing green infrastructure, porous pavement, things like that. Lastly, increasing biodiversity and creating wildlife habitat. Specifically when thinking about biodiversity in the urban forest or in a community forest, applications that encourage and identify a multitude of tree species will be highly ranked. We're looking for diversity. We're looking to create forests that are going to be healthy long-term and that will be resilient to potential pests that are coming through. So like I noted before, funding availability for the maximum grant award is 75,000 to be spent over 2 fiscal years. So that's fiscal year 27 and 28. Portion of those grant funds must be spent on tree watering, and tree watering must be identified in your grant application that will be occurring for a minimum of 2 years. This is a reimbursement grant program, meaning that the applicant must be prepared to incur the costs up front. As we're working through the grant program, you would present proofs of payment and other items that are related to your grant. And then once they're reviewed and double checked, then you would be able to be submitting and receive your reimbursement. Lastly, just want to note, any costs that are incurred prior to the award will not be eligible, as is standard practice in many of our EEA grant programs. Eligible applicants, this has increased a bit this year. Municipalities, nonprofit organizations, tribal governments, public and private schools, public boards and commissions are all eligible to apply. I do highly encourage you to partner if possible, and encourage applicants to work collaboratively within your communities to ensure that everybody is on board with the project that you're presenting. So some different project ideas that you could potentially submit for application. A tree planting project that targets a specific neighborhood that has documented urban heat islands, hotspots, or other areas that are suffering from extreme heat. Projects that create cool corridors. So again, this is would be planting trees along sidewalks, walking paths, roadways, where populations are or pedestrians are walking frequently, specifically to places like schools, senior centers, health centers, transit stops, and other areas where large community member gatherings occur. Removal of impervious surfaces. So again, like what I had mentioned before, the installation, or I'm sorry, the removal of impervious surfaces, and then putting trees in the ground where you remove surfaces. So that would be an absolute eligible project, and you could also use funding to remediate soil while you were doing that. Other items associated with removal of impervious surfaces are certainly eligible. And then installation of green infrastructure in tandem with tree planting. And lastly, like I had mentioned before, the cooling services. Those are all eligible items that you could potentially pitch along with tree planting. So I highly encourage you to utilize the Resilient Mass Mappers tool to identify hotspots within your project area. You can click on the link directly here, or you could Google it if you wanted to. This tool will help you identify hotspots in your community and area, and based on some of our evaluation criteria, this will help your grant application score higher if you're looking to plant trees in hotspots. And also, again, this is where the most benefits for your community are going to come from, and that's what we're looking to achieve. I'm going to hand it over to Kara Runston from the MVP program to start us off. She's going to discuss the new Mass Enviro screen tool, and then also my colleague at the EJ office, Sienna, is going to talk about it a little bit more too. So go ahead, Kara. Thanks.
Thank you, Hillary.
Yes.
Nice to be here today. I see a lot of familiar folks on the call, so nice to see you all as well. I'm Kara Runston. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the MVP program director. And I'm also helping to lead up the Eco One Stop effort. And so I'm just here to talk a little bit about this new tool. And then, as Hillary mentioned, Sienna will take over to really dive into it. And she's really the expert on the tool, so I'll pass it off to her. But just for a little context, we're excited to be piloting this new tool with our Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. And when we created the term priority populations many years ago at EEA, we were lacking a way to really discuss all the attributes that could make communities more vulnerable to climate impacts. There are many communities, for example, that didn't have a mapped EJ block group, but did have folks who were more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change for a variety of reasons, for example, health. So now this gap is being addressed through this new Mass Enviroscreen tool, which you can see a screenshot on the slide here. And maybe somebody can pop the actual link in the chat. But it's a new tool that's being designed to identify areas experiencing overlapping environmental, climate, and social vulnerabilities. So for this grant application, references to EJ populations will be replaced with burdened areas to reflect this cumulative place-based conditions. The Mass Enviroscreen was initially developed by the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity in response to the 2024 Climate Act, which introduced new requirements to consider cumulative impacts in clean energy and siting and permitting decisions. The tool supports these analyses by providing a consistent framework for understanding how multiple stressors intersect in specific places. By applying this same lens within the grant process, Massachusetts aims to better align program design and decision-making with its EJ commitments and ensure that resources and benefits are responsive to communities facing the highest cumulative burdens. So we're going to be piloting it in the grant space through its use in the ECO One-Stop application. And again, I said the word piloting because we, this is something that we are trying out in the grant space. So we really want to hear your feedback on the tool. And Sienna will share an email address that you can send feedback to. The decision to pilot it in the grant space was made only recently, so we haven't been referencing it through the expression of interest process. So if you've already had a call, you may have not heard about it yet. So you didn't miss anything if you haven't heard about it. It's going to be, again, utilized the same way that the EJ map was, so it'll help identify if proposed projects are located in and benefiting burdened and vulnerable communities. So now I'll turn it over to Saina, who will talk more about the tool and give you a little tour.
Oh, I just want to note real quick, Sienna did put the link in the chat, and then also the slide at the bottom there, that is a link as well. So if you're going back and you need to reference it, you can use that link as well. But thank you, Kara and Sienna. Go ahead. Do you need me to move to the next slide, Sienna?
Yes, next slide, please.
Sure.
And good morning, everyone, and thank you, Kara and Hillary, for the introduction. My name is Saina Mashmasarmi, and I am an Environmental Justice Liaison within the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity, and I'll be giving an overview of the Mass Enviroscreen. So the Mass Enviroscreen is a new statewide environmental justice screening tool that has been developed by the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity within EEA. It is a GIS mapping tool that identifies communities in Massachusetts where high levels of pollution and climate burden overlap with high levels of social vulnerability. And the tool assigns a cumulative burden score to every census block group in Massachusetts and is designed to provide the information to the public in a transparent and accessible way that is usable for communities. And we hope that the tool can be leveraged by communities to better understand local conditions quantitatively, to support advocacy and community organizing, and to strengthen grant applications. Next slide, please. So the Mass Enviroscreen uses 30 indicators, which fall into 5 components or categories of indicators, which include environmental exposure, environmental effects, climate risk, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors. The first 3 categories listed describe the types of pollution and climate burdens that communities experience, and this includes factors such as environmental exposure indicators, which are based on measurements of different types of pollution that people may come into contact with. This includes indicators such as rates of air pollutants like fine particulate matter and ozone. We have environmental effects indicators, which are based on the locations of toxic chemicals in or near communities that can cause adverse environmental conditions. This includes indicators like proximity to hazardous waste sites or impaired water bodies. And lastly, climate risk indicators, which speaks to a community's level of exposures to climate hazards. This category includes indicators like flood risks and extreme heat. The last two categories on this list are what are considered to be population characteristics and describe conditions that can make people or communities more vulnerable to those climate and pollution burdens. So that those categories include sensitive population indicators, which measure the prevalence of physiological or health conditions in a community, and sensitive population indicators capture health factors such as rates of pediatric asthma and premature mortality. And then we have socioeconomic factor indicators, which are conditions that may increase people's stress or make healthy living difficult and decrease capacity to adapt. And in this category, we look at things like linguistic isolation, rates of poverty, and unemployment. You'll notice that these components and the indicators captured by the tool are intentionally more oriented towards community and health and well-being, and this people-centered focus reflects the core purpose or one of the core purposes of environmental justice in ensuring that cumulative impacts on communities are considered alongside other types of environmental analyses. And so we hope that these components come together and provide a more comprehensive picture of cumulative impact in the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. And so this slide covers or describes the underlying methodology behind the Mass EnviroScreen tool to contextualize some of the outputs that the tool presents. And so firstly, for each indicator, we calculate a percentile rank across census block groups statewide. We then average those percentile ranks within each component category. So we get an average score from environmental exposures, one for environmental effects, and so on. And then we group these component scores into the two main categories, which are the pollution and climate burden, and then the population characteristics to generate the final cumulative burden score. We multiply the burden score by the population characteristics score, and the product is a raw score that reflects the interaction between these two buckets of characteristics. And the final step is to take the product and determine its percentile amongst all census block groups in the state. Therefore, the final score will indicate the percentage of scores in a group that are equal to or higher than a given score. So for example, if a community receives a Mass EnviroScreen score of 75 or higher, that means that that particular community or census block group experiences cumulative burdens equal to or greater than 75% of all block groups in the state. Next slide, please. The result of this methodology and model is that on the Mass EnviroScreen, higher scores will indicate greater combined environmental and social vulnerability. However, to be considered a burdened area, a census block group must meet one or both of the following criteria. And so it must have a Mass EnviroScreen score at or above the 75th percentile, or a median household income that is 65% or less of the statewide median. And importantly, a community not identified as a burden area may still exhibit elevated percentile values for individual indicators. And in those cases, applicants are encouraged to review the Mass EnviroScreen at the indicator level to better understand localized conditions and explain how their project is benefiting those more vulnerable individuals. And so when you access the Mass EnviroScreen tool, the burden areas communities will be highlighted in red. However, all census block groups will receive a Mass EnviroScreen score that can be accessed through the tool, as well as the indicator percentiles for each community. Next slide, please. And so as Kara mentioned earlier, the Mass EnviroScreen will essentially replace how the EJ populations designation and EJ map viewer was originally used within the grant application. However, we thought it would be helpful to walk through screenshots of the application as there is a lot more information and data present on the tool itself. And so when you first click into the tool, a text pop-up, which is screenshotted on the left side of on the right side of the slide, a text pop-up will provide a summary of what Mass EnviroScreen is and how it was developed. And within that overview is a link to the technical documentation, which is labeled in the text pop-up as technical documentation, but this document will be an important resource as it explains the indicators, the data sources, and the context behind the data captured within the tool. And then you'll also see that here on the map, areas designated as burden areas are highlighted in red, but this is only the starting point. Next slide. So this slide shows what will appear when you click on a specific census block group. So this slide shows a census block group in Pittsfield that has been designated as a burdened area. When you click on the census block group, a full table listing the raw values and percentiles for each indicator will appear. For our purposes, I've zoomed in on the socioeconomic indicators to look more closely at how the data is presented. You'll see here that for each indicator, there is both a raw value and a percentile. For the application's purposes, it is the percentile which will be most relevant, as the percentile will tell you how this block group compares to other block groups across Massachusetts. Next slide, please. On this slide, you'll see a census block group in Provincetown. You'll notice that this area is not designated as a burden area overall, but when we look more closely, we still see elevated indicators within the population's characteristics category. So I've zoomed in on the sensitive population category of indicators. Again, we see both raw values and percentiles. And you'll notice that even though this block group does not meet the threshold for a burden designation, there are certain indicators which are elevated relative to the rest of the state, including specific population vulnerabilities, and those will be important to acknowledge and address in an application. Next slide, please. And so that concludes my portion of the presentation, but if there are any questions related to the draft Mass EnviroScreen tool, please feel free to drop them in the chat or raise them at the end. And if, as you explore the tool, if any questions come up, please feel free to contact OEJE at ej.inquiries@mass.gov. Thank you.
Thank you, Sienna, and thank you, Kara, for that information. I'm going to finish the rest of the information session, and then if folks have questions for Sienna or Kara at the end, feel free. Okay. So when we're thinking about eligible project costs for this grant program, I know this is a very wordy slide. I'm not going to read from it word for word, but just wanted to put some information in there for everybody around what could be potential project costs that you will incur. So an obvious one would be the purchase of trees, but also costs associated with watering, including the labor associated with it if you were planning to contract the watering services out, the purchase of watering bags or other equipment that you may need to water trees for, again, 2 consecutive years. And then when we're thinking about removal of impervious surfaces, like I had mentioned before, the actual physical removal of the surfaces, but also healthy loam and other materials to restore the soil to make sure that it is fit for tree planting would also be an eligible project item, along with other items that would assist with cooling services and then also green infrastructure. Grant requirements. So first and foremost, like I had mentioned before, we want to make sure that the trees that are planted are following the right tree, right place principles, meaning that trees are being put into the ground in the proper locations. Certainly you don't want to see any tree species that are considered invasive or prohibited in Massachusetts. Also will not be funding any projects that are hoping to plant trees that are unfortunately are susceptible to pests currently. So emerald ash borer is present in most of Massachusetts. So we'll not want to see any ash trees planted. Unfortunately, beech leaf disease is also prevalent in Massachusetts. So no beech trees. And then if you're located within the Worcester Asian longhorn beetle restrictive zone, there's a whole host of tree species that would not be eligible for planting. This program is funded primarily to plant shade trees wherever possible. Again, the best tool that we have as far as tree planting goes for mitigating heat is to plant larger species. So the emphasis on planting large species is something that is required in the grant and is a large focus of the grant program. And then again, as noted, and following the right tree, right principle places, if there are locations that are located under wires or have restrictions and obstacles that would make planting a shade tree irresponsible, we would be looking to see lower growing species cited in those locations in your tree planting plan. Grantees may elect to plant trees in-house, so with your staff, or to contract the work out. A grant requirement of the Cooling Corridors program is to have either a Massachusetts certified arborist or an ISA certified arborist present managing the day-to-day plantings. That can be again somebody, your staff member, if you're tree warden, or if you have your DPW staff member that is certified, that's absolutely okay. If not, the company that you would potentially contract with should have somebody present for those day-to-day plantings that has the knowledge base that we're looking for to manage tree plantings. And this is to ensure that trees are being put into the ground correctly. I do have a variety of links here at the bottom. Most of them are DCR urban forestry fact sheets. I encourage you to look through them. I can also send them via email, and there are a few of them that are uploaded onto the Cooling Corridors website. These fact sheets detail just the methodologies that we're looking for as far as how we want to see trees planted, and then also touch upon caring for trees, the correct way to water, mulch, stake if trees are needing to be staked, and then also what other species varieties that could be potentially good choices for when you're creating your tree planting plan. And I encourage you to read through the bid document that is going to be posted soon, and to reach out if you have any additional questions. Application requirements. So few general ones like a project narrative and a project budget. I do want to note for the project budget that I asked, that's an error. It should be fiscal year 27 and 28. The budget should be split into the 2 fiscal years, indicating how much you intend to spend in each fiscal year. Project narrative should outline your general approach, and then also can include your watering plan and your intentions for stewardship, any kind of community partnerships that you intend to encourage throughout the grant process. The planting plan should identify planting locations, areas that you plan to target for planting, tree species that you are intending to plant, and also it's imperative that you show either via a letter of support or some sort of other indication that your municipal planning department and or your DPW department has reviewed your plan, and the municipality or the community as a whole is on board with the project that you're proposing. Additional application requirements: submitting a tree watering plan, like I had mentioned before. This can be relatively simple, just detail how you plan to water trees for 2 consecutive years, whether you're going to do that in-house, whether you're going to contract it out, if you're going to be procuring watering bags, additional and any additional information that you want to share. A letter of support from your tree warden or tree commission. This is required. And again, this is just showcasing that the community is on board with what you're planning to plant, and everybody is on the same page as far as what your project is proposing. Again, some sort of documentation that your planting plan has been reviewed by the planning board. Specifically, if it's planning to plant on proposed municipal lands. A letter of endorsement from any partners that you're planning to plant trees on, that if the applicant is planning to plant trees on a location that they don't own, for example, a nonprofit organization is planning to plant on municipal lands, that would be a letter of endorsement, or maybe vice versa. If a municipality is looking to plant on privately owned land, we want to make sure that we're seeing a letter of support from the landowner. And then just a map of the proposed location and any current site photos. Site photos aren't required, but it certainly makes it easier for the review team to obtain as much information about your potential project as possible. Project evaluation criteria. This has changed a little bit from last year. So it's split up into 3 categories. The first being and detailing around the project description. So this can all be referenced in the RFR that will be coming out soon, but the project description gives about 25 points to the project scope, which would be your detailed narrative, your potential community engagement or community partnerships surrounding your proposed project, and then your identification of your watering and tree planting plan, how you propose to achieve the goals that you set out. 15 points will be allocated if the project is either located within a burdened area, and then also an additional 5 points. So I'm sorry, 10 points will be awarded, up to 10 points if your project is located within a burdened area. And that is a scaled point system. So if half of your project area is within a burdened area, half is not, you would get a percentage of points. And then, as Sienna had mentioned, if there are trees planted in proposed trees planted in a location that isn't necessarily designated as a burdened area, but has some other indicators, environmental or health indicators that are identified within the Mass EnviroScreen tool, 5 points will be allocated towards that. So please ensure that you're using that tool to your benefit and using it to help select locations that you're looking to really plant trees and benefit community members that will potentially need this the most. And then lastly, 50 points will be designated to project benefits. So again, details about where the project is going to be located, if it's located within a walking route or residential area with a lot of pedestrian traffic, planting within hotspots, your tree watering plan and your tree planting plan are identified, and you have reflected the principles of right tree, right place, where the trees are sited in the correct locations. Your proposed species list is increasing biodiversity. So again, looking for a multitude of species proposed. I do want to put a caveat in that I understand that sometimes nursery availability can be difficult at tree nurseries. So I do encourage you to maybe present a list that has species that you would like to plant. And then if you're awarded the grant process, we can talk about the procurement process and how you will potentially execute your biodiversity goals. Because I do recognize that sometimes it can be difficult to say what tree you're going to plant over a year ahead of time when you're not in the procurement phase yet and you're not having those conversations with nurseries. And then additional 5 points will be allocated for cooling services in tandem with planting trees. Grant timeline. So, like I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, the RFR will be released January 20th. After that, if you would like some more information about the Eco One Stop portal and program, and information surrounding the larger Eco One Stop RFR, there are 2 webinars scheduled. So those are listed there. Please feel free to reach out to myself, to Kara, or to others in the Eco One Stop team for more information. You can also simply Google Eco One Stop and you will find a way to register for those webinars. And then also our new grant management system, it's actually not that new now. We've been using it for about a year. I'm assuming that some, if not most of you have used it by now, but if not, there's also a how-to webinar, how to navigate through the grant management system in order to submit your application. Application deadline for this grant program will be Friday, March 20th. Again, you must submit this application through the grant management system portal. No applications will be accepted via email. They must go through the system. So if you haven't used the system yet, I encourage you to get on there, sign up. You need to, there are a few steps involved. I'll leave the details to the information session, but you definitely want to make sure that you're signed up and ready to go because all of our EA grants will be using this portal from now on. And then around June, we are hoping to announce awards and with the goal of contracting July 1st, 2026. So this very start of the fiscal year, 2027. The projects will be executed from July 1st, 2026 through June 30th, 2028. Like I had mentioned, this is a fiscally 2-year grant. Tree watering again must be executed for 2 full growing seasons. So if you were to plant trees in the fall of 2026, you would need to ensure that you have a plan for watering those trees in fall of 2026, spring of 2027, fall of 2027, and then spring into summer of 2028, all the way to the fall season. Summer is the most crucial time for watering. So we really want to see that emphasis on watering through those 2 hot summer years to ensure that those trees survive. And lastly, I will come out and meet with the project management team to inspect trees, confirm plantings, and just discuss the project and process before a final reimbursement is submitted. How to apply. Like I just mentioned, the grant management system, there's a link right here in the slide, or you can certainly Google that or reach out if you have any questions on how to access the grant management system. It's a grant application portal that that is really streamlining the process as far as submitting applications for EEA grants. Your application is submitted right through the portal. The confirmation, the contracting, the progress reports, your reimbursements, all will be submitted through this portal. So I encourage you to head to that webinar if you're not familiar with the system to make sure that you are knowledgeable and ready for this coming grant season. And lastly, again, we do not accept applications via email anymore, all through the grant management system portal. And that is it for me. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I'm going to open up the floor to any questions, and yeah, feel free to either raise your hand or just jump in. I'm also going to just check the chat here. So Danny, I see that you said thanks for the great tool. Will projects proposed for non-burden areas be considered for funding? How will they be weighed against projects in burden areas? So yes, if you, like Sian had mentioned, you can use the different evaluating factors that are within the tool to plant trees in your community that maybe still having different indicators that like higher levels of pollution or other health criteria that may make planting trees beneficial to your community. And you would receive a 5 out of the 15 eligible points for that. Alice, 3-inch caliper is a little too big. We could potentially discuss that, but I prefer to keep trees planted within 1 inch to 2.5 inch. If you have a specific project that you think would really benefit from a larger caliper tree, I encourage you to message me and we can talk about it before you submit your application. But my general rule is 1 to 2.5 inch. And then would tree maintenance pruning be permitted as a long-term effort for existing canopy, or would public education efforts be considered citizens pruners? Yes, tree maintenance and pruning is permitted. And public education efforts also absolutely. I love the idea of a citizen pruner program. That would certainly be an eligible project idea for sure. You see, just to clarify, what is the process for sidewalk repair before planting? Is this covered through grants? Brian, would you want to describe what do you mean by sidewalk repair? I guess, if you don't want to speak up, if you're creating tree pits, that's an eligible project item because you're removing impervious surface, you're creating a tree pit to install a tree pit. This grant does not fund curbing some of the sidewalks where the trees we planted are damaged. So the grant does not fund sidewalk restoration projects. It would only fund the removal of impervious surfaces to create a tree pit. That answers your question. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for myself, Sienna, or Kara? They're both still on if you had questions specifically about the Amass EnviroScreen tool. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I will put this recording up on the Cooling Corridors website. The PowerPoint will also be up on the website. I encourage you to connect, reach out. My email is right here. You can give me a call if you'd rather do that. And please look for the RFR. It's coming out next week. I'm sorry. Yes, next week. So please look for that. And please be in touch in the meantime with any additional questions. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.